Hello, everyone. My name is Shrija, and I'm the host for today's webinar. A very warm welcome to the eGov Academy Learning Series. We are so glad to have all of you here. This series is all about sharing, learning, and co-creating the future of public service delivery. Together, we will explore how public service system can be empowered and digitally transformed to evolve into thriving ecosystems, rooted in collaboration, powered by DPI, while keeping focus on citizen centricity. In today's session, we will walk you through eGov's unique approach and journey, and the principle that guide our work. We are kicking off today with a powerful session from systems to ecosystem, where we will dive into five-thread approach that underpins our transformational journey so far. We are especially excited to have Jojo Mehra, our Chief Product Officer, here with us. He will walk you through our thinking, share ideas and stories, and help connect the dots in our journey of impact. Get ready for an insightful session, and we invite you not to just listen, but engage, reflect, and be part of the journey. Over to you, Jojo.
Thanks, Shrija. I'm hoping my audio is clear.
Yes.
Okay, so just allow me a second to share my screen. Just give me a second. And if you can confirm once you see the presentation.
Yes, can see the presentation.
All right, great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joined. Thanks, Shrija, for so this is the first of our learning series. Excited to kind of share what we've learned along the way. This titled the eGov Way, five threads of impact. And it's feel free to kind of raise your hand and ask a question. Shrija's going to be there along the way to answer questions, etc. Shrija, in case you need to kind of stop me during the chat, very happy to do that as well. But let's get started. A quick couple of slides on what eGov is, what our purpose is, etc. Before we get into the five threads. So our purpose is, like Shrija expressed early on, is to make everyone's life better, and we do this by enabling transparent, equitable, accessible public services. There are three things that we do while we catalyze public service delivery. One, we build open source platforms, and our key platform over here is Digit. We enhance local capacity and we catalyze markets. Currently, we work in the spaces of local governance, public health, water, sanitation, public finance management, agriculture, justice, education, and a lot more. And we work largely with partners. So as of now, we work with over 200 partners. Our work is present in 9 countries. And totally, we would have delivered close to about 1.5 billion services, impacted about 1 billion citizens, raised revenues for governments and departments for about $2 billion. And there are multiple use cases that are built on Digit. So with that, let me get into the eGov way. So this is, just to kind of lay it out. Every organization that works has a theory of change on how they bring about impact. Our playbook for societal transformation was captured in 5 steps. And these are the 5 steps on the screen. One, we realized through the work that eGov has done for over 20 years that, if you want to build sustainable impact, if you want transformation at scale, you've got to have a network of people working alongside you, right? You should not, working alone doesn't go far. And hence the first step really is to go and create a shared narrative and build a coalition of partners in the ecosystem. The second was to design, to build, to spec out foundational digital public goods. The third was to actually exemplify the promise of the platform and do it quickly, do it at scale, and do it really fast. And I'll go through each of these in the subsequent slides, just laying it out here. And the fourth step really was, to work in building out a network of partners that will help sustain this mission. And finally, looking at measures, ways of sustaining, institutionalizing the overall impact of the mission itself. when we then looked at the work that we were doing there, so this is from a couple of years ago, what we figured was that these steps are not really steps, right? Because there were four things that we were doing at that point in time. A lot of the work was happening in the urban space in local governance. There was work happening in public finance management as a domain. There was work happening in sanitation, and there was work happening in health. And what we noticed was that while there were elements of a shared narrative, of building out the foundational DPG, of running exemplars, at scale, of working with the ecosystem, trying to build a network of partners, etc., and sustainability, all of these weren't really steps. They were happening at different paces. They were happening with a different sequence in each of these missions that we were working on. Um, and we arrived at a realization that these five threads these five steps are actually threads that are interwoven together, right? Where they are discrete, each of them, but they are interdependent. So the work that, for example, that you're doing in building out a shared narrative has a lot to do with how the mission will sustain itself, or how you will go and scale this impact, or how you even go and build out the foundational DPG. So similarly, when you are exemplifying, it is by in the process of exemplifying what you are doing, you're actually building out, refining the DPG itself, and hence learning a few new things that changes your understanding of the problem, of the solution, and hence of the narrative, right? So like I was saying, these are discrete but interdependent. They're not sequential, they happen simultaneously, and the sequence is very different for each initiative, each mission that you start off with, right? So here are the five threads, and I'm going to be spending the next 20-30 minutes just going over all of them. And what we've done is we've taken an example of one such case and taken them through the five threads, right? So this is basically the start, on why we believe that it's a visual metaphor as well on why we believe that one thread is not enough. For example, it's just not enough to go and build out a foundational DPG and say, hey, that's going to bring about transformational change, because one thread is not strong enough, right? It breaks under pressure, and we'll see in the next few slides on what happens. So the first thread we'll spend some time on is creating a coalition of partners and building out a shared narrative. And first, just a few notes on what this is, right? So this is building out a core coalition of partners who are invested in solving a problem, and they bring with them their experience, their knowledge, their experience of saying, how do you look at a problem for many, many different ways? What this allows all of us to do is to reimagine what the core problems, the key problems, or the pivotal problems are, and it brings about a diversity of perspectives. Um, the dissemination of what the reimagined state or your picture of success would look like is then kind of it becomes a political currency amongst all the partners, where we're saying the same thing, saying that, hey, this is a problem to be solved. Here are the different perspectives. We've aligned on a common understanding of what the problem is, what is the sequence of solving is, what is the approach of solving it, and what we see as the picture of success. There is a commitment to actually doing something about it. And there's a shared agenda around which these partners coalesce, right? And trying to identify with the partners on saying who's going to be a champion within the country of, who can take the lead in moving the system. A few notes also on what it is not. It is definitely not just a thought exercise. It is not just about doing research or writing a white paper. It's not about finding a strategy and finding partners, etc. It's definitely not a fitment of a DPG or any other product that's been built, and it's not about convincing others on one perspective, right? Typically the outcomes that we look for in this thread is looking at, one, who are the partners who are going to be along with this journey in the core coalition. What's the scope of the problem that we define? What's the sequencing of things that will happen? And we do look at the feasibility of the overall mission. This is not an internal organizational construct, but we're looking at the mission overall, what the problem is. And finally, your outputs, for example, and these are illustrative again, your outputs could look like a co-created shared narrative, and the approach which is published and distributed by this group coalition. There is a roadmap for transformation, and the roadmap includes not just tech, because when you use the word roadmap, typically the understanding is that it's a roadmap for a product, for a DPG, for a platform, etc. But this is not just tech, right? This is a roadmap for the mission overall, saying that beyond the tech, how you're going to be looking at funding, what is the feasibility, how you're going to look about, how you're going to find its institutional home, etc., etc. Um, Now, just a couple of thoughts on why is this thread important, and I think this is, so there's a slide on why for each of these threads, and again, if there are any questions around this, happy to take it either at the end of of the session, or if you want to kind of write back to us, or you can put it in chat as well, right? So one, we came to the realization that while there are ecosystems and there are partners trying to solve these really tricky, hairy problems, these are wicked problems, um, the ecosystems are often fragmented, right? And what we end up seeing is that there are suboptimal outcomes achieved in each of these domains. Um, and this is in spite of the fact that there are tremendous efforts, people work with earnestness. There are investments that are poured in. You'll see the word Samaj Sarkar Bazaar over here. For those who are not familiar, so Samaj is essentially, this is civil society, Sarkar is the government, and Bazaar is markets, right? And the civil society, governments, markets need to come together and solve the problem is what we believe. And hence, how do you bring this entire fragmented ecosystem together around a specific problem? The second reason why a shared narrative is important is because when you look at a decisive energy, right, where there is, every problem that you look at a point in time, you realize that there is energy in the ecosystem to go and solve it, but that energy has a window of opportunity, right? You sense that by the pace, the alignment around the initiatives, etc. Um, to arrive at a shared understanding of the problem space, along with a shared narrative of the solution space, you need certain conditions. And if those conditions are there, it makes moving forward a lot more feasible. And finally, having a shared point of view of the problem space and the picture of success is what will help you move forward, where you can root this in an actual opportunity. And like I said in the beginning, it's not just a thought exercise. I'll give you an example through these 5 threads of the work that we've been doing with lots of partners in the public health space, and we'll take the example of health campaigns and health campaign management that we started off with, which was our entry point into making a difference in public health overall, and helping countries, working with countries on their transformation on public health. Right. So the first stage over here, for example, in HCM, when we started, we worked very closely with a few partners. We got an opportunity to work with Missau, which is a malaria program in Mozambique, as core partners. And we started collaborating with multiple partners to even understand the various dimensions, as aspects of the problem itself, and hence what the approach to solving them should be. The second thread is building out these foundational DPGs. And again, like I said, this is not sequential, right? Like there is a logical sequence to some of the activities, but this can happen simultaneously. For example, what is foundational DPG, which is basically saying that you're not trying to build a point solution over here. What you're trying to do is abstract out the problems, identify the pivotal problems, and then say, how do you spec for it? How do you design for it? This goes beyond just, again, the tech piece, right? You are designing and specing for policy, for program, for platform, for the product, to go and create something which will work in an actual use case. You're able to articulate what the reimagined change would look like from the country's perspective, and you've got a specification of the building blocks that's going to be used in that country. What it is not is, while it is used in one specific use case to start with, the design of it is done in a manner that it is not restrictive to that one use case, right? You've got to think about the fact that, hey, while our first use case in looking at health campaigns could be, powering a BedNet campaign, in the design, you've got to think about saying that, hey, one, it may not just be malaria. Two, it may not just be a bednet campaign. There could be an SMC campaign, an IRS campaign, etc., etc. So how do you factor that into the design of the DPG itself? And finally, it's not just a tool or a solution, right? And it's definitely not only digit. How do you build out in a manner where interoperability will be required to, you would be required to work with systems that are already existing in those spaces? Have you thought about that? How are you going to be working with that? Finally, when you're designing a DPG, this is not a solution to all problems, right? You need to define your scope and say that this is how we're addressing it. The outcomes that we're looking at is you basically enable the ecosystem to go and solve these pivotal problems. Um, you are able to identify these points of interactions and take a fairly complex problem and simplify it to simple interactions. And you are working with the capacity of the system to self-improve, right? And this happens over multiple iterations. Typically, the outputs of this would look like, if you're talking about your digital artifacts, there would be a system, an application, there would be APIs, there'd be how-to documents, there'd be demos, etc. If you're looking at program artifacts, we work on program design. There are enablement artifacts. There's an adoption approach. If you're looking at impact artifacts, there are success stories, there is evidence generation, there are M&E frameworks, and you're saying, how can this be leveraged by the network of partners to be able to scale? Once you've done a few of these, it gets translated typically into playbooks that can be adopted very easily by others. Um, so the why of specking, designing, and building foundational DPGs. So like I was saying that in the approach that we work in, right, it helps you engage with fairly complex problems and then untangle them into simple interactions. And you do that by each one of these, whether you are working on a specification, whether you're working on a platform or you're doing a prototype, has a specific purpose. I will leave this over here on the screen. It's, that there's a lot to read, etc. But broadly speaking, this, when you are designing, you're not just designing for one specific use case. Is the essence of how you engage with this thread. So, for example, when we were co-creating, coming back to this example of HCM and public health, this was the first sectoral DPI for health. We were co-creating it for Mozambique. In Mozambique, Digit HCM is known as Salama. And this was literally done with people on the ground. So the team would have spent, the eGov team working with other partners, etc., would have spent about 100 days in Africa on the ground, shadowing campaigns, to understand what needs to be built. There was rapid prototyping, what we saw on the previous slide. There were validations that were coming in. There were usability tests. Every time something hits the ground, we do a system usability assessment to say, hey, is this actually solving the need of the people who are using it, and not broadly just the program as well. So each person. Um, and these were it obviously wasn't done alone. We were fortunate enough that we had a great set of partners, starting from Misau to CHAI to CRS, Malaria Consortium, Goodbye Malaria, AMP, WHO, the Gates Foundation, and the Global Fund, working with us even before the first version went live. The third thread really is about exemplifying the platform promise, and this is where a lot of the energy actually gets generated in this phase. Shija is kind of nodding and smiling because she's been in the thick of these things, in health, in sanitation, and so this is where you would see a lot of what's been thought through, the understanding of the problems actually play out on the ground. What this is essentially a reference implementation to say, hey, can this actually happen at scale? And when we say scale, we're typically talking about, in the Indian context at least, we're talking about at a statewide level. If you're looking at the African context, maybe at a province level, or at a national, at a national scale is what we would consider scale. It's designed and implemented to capture the interplay of your capacity, local ecosystem, the technology, etc. And there are often, things that you've not thought through early on, and this gives you a chance to actually go and work on those, whether that's on the product, on the platform, on the program. There are policy changes, etc. Exemplification is important for multiple reasons. One, from just the design of the program, platform, product, policy, etc. It lets you absorb the variability into everything that you are designing, right? So there is, through these rapid feedback loops, it's only when your code hits the road, or you have your program that's actually it's kicked off. You can see certain gaps in the thinking, but it forces you to have a feedback mechanism where this comes back and you quickly iterate and saying, hey, is it going to work now? And when you do it at scale, you've hopefully captured in a lot of the variability that allows you then to replicate this in other places. What it is not, it's definitely not an eGov only implementation. In fact, in Africa, and you'll see over the next few slides, we've deliberately, kind of been fortunate enough, and as part of our strategy, said that we're going to be partner led. Right, so that's the first thing. It's definitely not something that a organization or only eGov does. It's not a comprehensive solution to all problems, right? So there is an exemplar. The exemplar has a scope. It has a definite big picture of success. It's time bound, and it happens at scale. It's not just about tech and software. Like, and I think I'll be repeating this over and over again, because the tendency is to believe that, hey, if you build a product or you build a platform, etc., it's going to solve all problems. That is a part of the approach. It works, within your processes. It works with people. You need to understand, the affordances of people. You need to understand what policy structure is there, what governance structure is there, which is what makes it work. And it's not focused on only one actor, right? There are multiple actors that you need to be thinking about. The typical outcomes that you look at are, it happens at scale, either at a national or a subnational scale. It happens quickly. Your outcome is not just doing the exemplar or running the campaign, etc. What you need to gauge for is, has the capability of your key actors improved? Have they actually adopted it? The end goal really is that you are demonstrating to the ecosystem that, hey, this can actually happen, this approach can actually work, it can work at scale. And you need to be able to gauge, is there enough confidence in the ecosystem to be able to pick it up and actually scale it, right? So the outputs of this, again, I mentioned over here, which is largely around the exemplar. Why this is important? One, relevance, right? You need to be able to identify whether whatever is being designed, is being built, it's being rolled out. Can it address the nature of this problem, which we know changes, right? And as you scale, you realize it becomes clearer and clearer on what needs to be done. And hence, can this actually scale? Can it work at scale? Two, it builds confidence, and it builds confidence in the ecosystem, in the approach. It's not confidence, again, to re-emphasize, it's not confidence in only a product. It's the entire approach to running, a transformation journey at scale. And finally, it builds trust in the ecosystem on the viability and the feasibility of this approach. The first exemplar, coming back to an example of, our learned experience from Mozambique, the first exemplar was completed successfully. And this then led to the scaling impact, which brings me to the fourth thread on saying, how do you scale this up, right? So scaling the impact really is saying, we spoke about that, hey, this is not a journey that an organization, in this case eGov, is undergoing alone, right? And hence, when we are thinking about societal transformations, you've got to think about it not as an afterthought, but right at the inception, saying that, what's the network of partners that will be required to be able to scale this? And then a network of partners includes programmatic partners, it includes governments, it includes people from the civil society, people from the tech ecosystem, it includes your donor network. It's all these partners who are invested in the problem, who have different capabilities, different points of views. How are you building this entire network? And how are you governing this? The governance includes things like, how is the program set up? What's the charter? How are you going to be gauging success, etc., etc. If you're building up a supply of these networks actually participating, what needs to be done, right? And this is in the form of, there are lots of artifacts that need to be created, there are playbooks, there are case studies, etc., etc. um, if you want to take this message to other people, to other partners, to get them to look at this cause and this approach of solving a problem, there's a lot of evangelizing that needs to be done. You need to be able to take the message across. They need to be able to see whether it's worked or not. So there's a lot of evidence generation that happens, which you take to them. What it is not is, it's not just doing multiple implementations. That is not scale for us, right? We do the exemplar once, maybe twice, and that becomes literally an example for others to say, hey, other partners, other people can pick this up and move forward. It's not just for the government, and it's not just about building more products. The outcomes, like I said, what we're looking for over here is that the ecosystem actually takes root. They're able to kind of pick it up and run with it. Perhaps move on to other use cases using a similar approach. And the evidence of that, what you would see is that you would start seeing multiple programs across multiple states that are being catalyzed. Um, the outputs there typically are your package, sorry for the short form over here, DBB is the digital building blocks, right? I think we were just writing it as DBB here, but they're packaged in a manner that can easily be understood, adopted, they can start using it, etc. You would need to have sandbox forums, you have playbooks, and you have a reference governance framework that other people can pick up and start implementing, perhaps even contributing to. Um, why? I think it's self-explanatory. One is a capacity issue. Two, these are wicked problems. One size does not fit all, and hence you need a network of partners to come in who are contributing their point of view as well, and pretty much localizing it in their context. It helps to build capacity. And finally, we're looking at orchestration. Sorry, I'm just moving forward. I'm aware of time. Just moving forward a bit quickly now. In the case of Mozambique and what we were doing with public health, we were fortunate enough to have these partners. Typically, this is how it looked, and this is interesting because we launched in Mozambique with the first campaign for bed nets in malaria in August 2023. The next was in Liberia a few months later, then in Nigeria a few months later after that, then in Senegal, in Burundi, and then it started moving towards other adjacent use cases. We spoke about saying that, hey, you could start off with one use case, but when people start seeing something working on the same platform, and in this case on Digit, and there is capacity being built, you start seeing people move towards other use cases as well. You have Ethiopia, you have Djibouti, in upcoming you have Togo, Congo, and overall, in 20 months, as a result of following this approach, you are able to take this impact to 10 countries in about 20 months. Um, the final thread is about sustaining the impact. Here it is got to do a lot with how's this going to be funded, where is the money going to come from, and this is both market actors as well as government actors. How does the impact sustain without eGov in the room? What's the institutional setup? Which are the partners that are going to be looking at the governance of it? And how do you build a self-sustaining mechanism where you've got to be thinking about the incentives, the behaviors, and the governance? What it is not is, it's not only, while it is very important to have something institutionalized in the government, this is not only about government institutionalization, and it's just not only about financial sustainability, right? So it's all of these things. But finally, what we're saying is that, hey, anyone who's doing this, in this case, if eGov is leading this, how do you make sure that you are not dependent on eGov, but the ecosystem can take it forward, institutional structures can get formed and adopt this change. The typical outcomes of this, the ideal outcomes of this would be, it gets picked up by a government, which who define their budget lines. There are institutional structures to be able to go and manage it, to look at the implementations, to look at O&Ms. There is a market ecosystem around it. There are business unit created within one market players dedicated to this approach that they can take it forward. You have an actively engaged civil society who demand participation in how things are being governed, how things are being designed, and what problems are being solved. Um, the typical outputs of this is, from, again, this is internal to whoever, whether eGov or any other organization that's looking at this, saying that how do you activate a government, how do you activate markets, and how do you activate civil society? Um, this, I think, is self-explanatory again, right? Essentially, why you need to be able to sustain the impact is saying that otherwise it becomes too dependent on either a very specific funding line or an outsized kind of effort by one or two of the partners, right? It needs things to be able to sustain. If you want to sustain a long-term transformational journey, it needs an institutional structure. You need to be able to align incentives. You need to have enough capacity, and you need to have enough of a partner network to be able to go and support something like this. So this was, a quick run through of the eGov way or the five threads of transformation for exponential impact. But I think I'm at time. So Shrija, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jojo. So we can now open up the session for all the participants to have questions, queries, insights. Um, so inviting all the participants to put their questions on chat box, Q&A, and then we can take it up from there. Yes, Peter.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good afternoon, Kenyan time. This John Joe was a very good presentation. I think I have interacted a lot with your teams here in Kenya and also online. I've been very keen to study areas around DPI. With different approaches, I think what you're presenting is one of the key areas which are adding a lot of value in digital transformation across governments. I sit in African Committee for Digital ID, where we develop technical standards to enable interoperability of digital IDs across Africa. And I think there's a lot of learnings on what is happening across different African countries. We are different levels of digital projects implementation, even in terms of understanding of what is required. I have liked the way you put it in terms of we need to bring everybody on the table. One thing I didn't see coming out was how do you treat the existing ecosystems? What are the learnings you normally input in your design work? And what learnings can you push out? I think you've tried to do bits and bits in terms of the planning and what needs to go into it. But for us who are developing technical standards and guidelines to guide the African member states to develop a unified approach into organizational governance and technology applications or digital ID, which will provide, which will support different use cases for authentication of users in real time from trusted national ecosystems. I think this is a very good presentation you've done. It's only that now didn't you see you bring in the aspect of existing ecosystems. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. So if I captured it correctly, you're saying how do we engage with the work that's being done by existing players in existing ecosystems, right? It's spot on, Peter, right? I think we were also fortunate enough that I mean, partly kind of deliberate and fortunate enough that we were connected to the existing coalitions that existed in public health. So, for example, we were fortunate to have worked with the Alliance for Malaria Prevention, right? And this is again a body that works with a lot of partners, has a lot of knowledge, is able to, and they literally kind of taught us the way in saying that, hey, these are already accepted practices, or these are the challenges that are going on, or working with, let's say, WHO, or working with UNDP, right? These are already in a way coalitions where a lot of the knowledge over the years has been synthesized and has been kind of whittled down into playbooks, into methods, into processes, into SOPs, into standards, into specifications, etc. And in our work, then we take this and saying, okay, if there are these multiple coalitions and multiple point of views, how do you work with them, right? And what's the best that you can take with them? We wouldn't have been able to move this fast had it not been already on the work that other people have done, who were tackling this problem. But spot on, this is it's crucial to be able to find a way to be able, to leverage the knowledge that's already there in the ecosystem. You don't have to start from scratch all the time. I hope that answered your question, Peter.
Yes, it does. It does. Then, lastly, before I don't take a lot of time, is to just understand how do you are designed, in terms of the ecosystems. How do they leverage on authentication of, especially for the health sector, POCs which have already been implemented? How do they authenticate users? Do you create separate digital identity, data sets, or you normally do a lookup into existing platforms, national trusted digital IDs?
Yeah. So to this, like I said, one of our core kind of principles is that this is a decision for a country to make, right? From our perspective, we can share what we've learned, in terms of best practices, etc. But it's up to the country to decide on what they want to be able to use to authenticate their users, either workers or beneficiaries, etc. And we would always go with what the country wants, right? Because this is not, I don't think it's a tech question, right? This is more of a policy question and the considerations that a country has.
I hope that answers your question, Peter. So we'll move to next question. We have one on the chat box by Bhargavi. So she says, thank you so much for the interesting presentation. I would like to ask if Digit HCM has been rolled out in any part of the India, or if there are any other eGov initiated operational DPI health in India. Would like to get in touch later to learn about those and the comparison of implementation experiences across countries in DPI health.
Yeah, so very happy to be in touch on that, Bhargavi. But a quick answer to that. So HCM itself hasn't been rolled out in India as yet. But DPI for health, if you're familiar with DIVOC, so the DIVOC was essentially the orchestration platform that sat underneath Coven, right? So when you received your inoculation for your jabs for if you were here in India, and if you received your COVID vaccination, the entire the printout that you got with the QR code, right? So that entire orchestration happened on DIVOC, and DIVOC was what was powering Coven. So in a way, we're all kind of connected by that. Me included are connected by that one system that's actually been rolled out at scale in India and in 5 other countries. So that's on DIVOC. A lot of information of this is available on the eGov site. You can have a look at that. It's been implemented, of course, in India and 5 other countries. But if there's anything else that you would like to get in touch with, you can reach out to Shrija, to me, to anyone on the team, and we'd be happy to kind of tell you more about it.
Thanks, Jojo. Thanks, Bhargavi. Any other questions from the participants or insights if you want to share? We have another 15 minutes. So this is a good time to share your insights and questions if you have any. Okay. So with no answers, I think we have come to the end of the session today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We hope this session sparked new ideas and offered some fresh perspective and helped connect the dots like we spoke about systems to ecosystem movement. A big thank to Jojo for walking us through the eGov journey and for also sharing the principles and stories that continue to shape how we think, build, and transform. I hope it also helped others also thinking and beginning to think about that. So the learning series is a space for us to learn together across roles, sectors, and geographies. And we invite you to stay curious, keep engaging, and bring your questions and reflections to our next sessions. So these sessions will be conducted every second and fourth of Friday. So keep looking for our next sessions. We hope you join. And until next time, take care and keep building for impact. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today.